everybody, this is Brad from Board Game Geek. I'm here with Mike and Jordan from Harebrained Schemes, and we are here at a very Battletech themed booth. I think we're in the briefing room right now, you could call it that.
Yeah,
So can you tell us a little bit about how the game's coming along?
Mike would check that one.
Sure, yeah. We're about 8 or 9 months into actual development. The Kickstarter campaign funded last November. And so this is actually the very first public look at the game that we're offering to the audience. We just sent out a short video to our backers the other night. This is what we're calling our super pre-alpha build. It's an example of a combat mission that you would take on over the course of the single-player campaign. So we've got a pretty good sense of what combat should be like. We're pretty happy with the results. We've got a little bit more polish to go in still. I should say a lot more polish to go in still. But, you know, it's playable.
A lot of bugs to get out.
A lot of bugs to fix. And then from that, we really need to scale up to get PvP multiplayer in and, of course, the single-player campaign and story and all that stuff.
Very cool. So for fans of the old Battletech games, what can they expect here compared to what they played before?
Well, we have the benefit or the deficit, depending upon how you want to look at it, the fact that I designed the original tabletop. And so we're basing it as much as we can on that original design. And we really, I think one of our key criteria is, does this feel like Battletech, you know? You know, we're literal to as much as a lot of like the weapons. We have things to feel like when, you know, what a PPC feels. It's got to feel right. When you're in a Marauder, it feels like a Marauder. We're also innovating some places because, you know, computer games are different than tabletop. And so for things like initiative and turn order, places to be able to make that game flow faster and be able to get better information. We've done some innovation there. A lot of it was also, you know, designed the game 35 years ago almost. And one of the things I always wanted was that the light mechs and the medium mechs played a more important role. And that's something that our design has really been working on, and so far what we're hearing at the show here is that people are really finding that to be true.
Yep, it's really awesome. So you guys did do a Kickstarter campaign. How are you involving players in kind of your design process as you go through pre-alpha and beyond?
Well, we don't so much involve them in the design process because, you know, a giant committee designing a game is a very complicated thing, and we're fortunate enough to have a 50,000 person committee. So, but we do keep them extremely informed as to what we're doing.
I would also say that we listen, which isn't quite the same as saying that we ask, right? But we're constantly on the forums looking at what people are saying, what people are thinking, and looking for from the game. And then we synthesize that in our decision-making process.
It's exactly right. It's that feedback loop is critical for us. And so that's why we're always putting out like, hey, this is what we're working on. And then we get feedback, and that allows us to, as Mike said, synthesize that and decide where we're going to go forward with it. So this is a big step. But people watching the video over the last couple of days, we've been getting tons of feedback, which is great. And it's been really useful.
And really positive, too. It's like, you know, you're always a little bit nervous coming out to the show, especially when it's like the very first showing of the game. And so we've just been really thrilled with the response so far. And it's been really heartening, like, not just for us, but for the entire team.
And you know, based upon some of that response, we opened up the digital tiers of the Kickstarter again. The physical tiers we can't open up because, like, the jackets and all the cool banners and hats, they're already shipping. But for digital tiers, in terms of being able to get into the beta program, things like that, we have opened that up again, and we'll keep that open for the next month or so, and for people who do want to get involved.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So I noticed you guys were here kind of briefing people on the UI before they hop into the game. What are the kind of challenges you're working with in designing, you know, a UI that covers all the information but is usable and streamlined?
That's a great question. We've been through many an iteration. You know, one thing that Jordan and I were both really adamant about early on, well, two things actually. One was that we adopted a sort of rapid iteration prototyping model for proving out gameplay, and that didn't just involve game design, it also involved UI, right? I think we both believe, well, we have to get the design ideas right, but we also have to believe that we can communicate them. Right. And so we were prototyping rough UI even in the very earliest stages of the project. So that really helped us kind of get a leg up on, well, this is communicating or this is working. Like, we tested on just a couple of friends and other members of the studio. And then the other thing that we were really adamant about is just making sure that there's a fast flow of play that doesn't hide complexity or remove complexity, but that layers it better and that allows the player to quickly compute a turn without a lot of what's the right word for it? Without just a lot of repetitive tasks, right?
It's a really complicated challenge because mechs are enormous buckets of information.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you've got all these different weapon systems and armor in all these different locations, internal structure in all these different locations, critical systems in all these different locations. It's just a ton of information. And then you're commanding 4 of those guys.
Right.
So being able to express that information in a way that's coherent, not only about your force, but about the opposing force as well, because you care about all the same things on the opposing force. It's a lot of information. So that's why it's been a primary kind of axis of design from the very beginning.
And I should say our UI team's done an awesome job. I think what we end up doing is trying to, at every turn, anticipate what is the player going to want to see or do next. And then, the more we can predict that, the more that we're putting that piece of information just right there in the forefront of the UI. Like you'll see in a minute when we play the game, like the movement indicator automatically draws lines to where, what targets you have line of sight to, or will be able to shoot before you've even plotted your move. Because in prototyping, we quickly found, the player isn't just trying to figure out where to go, they're trying to figure out where they can go to either shoot or not be shot.
Right.
And so we just try to surface that so that it saves you a step.
That's really cool. So one thing I like is, we see a lot of the banners that have classic art, but also I feel like there's kind of a more modern take in some of the art as well. How have you married those two visions together, making it feel current, but also keeping the spirit of the old Battletech?
That's this guy here, so I'll let him speak to that.
Well, I should say, first of all, we're using all of the awesome mech designs from Piranha Games that make MechWare Online, so we're really grateful to have that as a really strong starting point. I think they did an awesome job reimagining the classic mech designs from the original game. So building out of that, I think what we're really trying to focus on is getting an additional sort of richness and depth to the world. And the setting and the characters and just all the little politics and nuances that make Battletech such a rich universe. And that's visually and story-wise and everything across the board.
I mean, it's a dirty, mucked up place. And we really wanted that to come across, in every look and feel, everything from the characters, to the mech, to the world itself. This is a universe in decline. And that's, I think, that's why salvage is so important and all those kind of things that were part of that original aesthetic that attracted people to this game 30 years ago. And it's fun to be able to bring that to life and the fidelity we can do now on screen. When Mitch and I made Mech Commander 1, 20 years ago, we couldn't approach this. When we did the last turn-based game for Battletech was Crescent Hawk's Revenge, and that was almost 30 years ago. And it's just, the amount of processing power we can apply to making that world have that texture is just mind-blowing.
And one other thing I'll add on the subject of art, I think to get that extra sense of groundedness and authenticity in the world, myself and, the rest of the concept art team, we've really reached for sources outside of Battletech history and canon, as well as what's come before. But, we're looking at everything from classical painters to movies and cinematography and illustrators that have nothing to do with sci-fi or Battletech as a franchise, but that are giving us the right sort of emotional palette or color read so that we can sort of hone in on something that feels like it has the gravity we want. And I think sometimes that gets missed sometimes, not just in this franchise, but in long-standing franchises in general. They just sort of become self-feeding, where it's like, well, I'm going to draw a mech and it looks this way. But, we're doing that, but maybe the lighting should be a certain way to give the viewer a sense of scale or mood or loss or whatever the theme at hand is. So
that sounds really like a really good process to go through. Just one last question on, you mentioned the story, kind of mixing elements of old and new. Players that are familiar with the universe, will you be retreading stories that have come before, or is this kind of a new story within that universe?
Well, much like mixing old and new in the art, we're doing the same in the story. So we've gone back to the very beginning of the start of the Battletech timeline. So we're in the year, starting the year 3025 era. And so that brings us back to the very beginning of the story. But we're focusing in the periphery, which is kind of the Wild West of the Battletech universe, and dealing with kind of minor fiefdoms and kingdoms there, as opposed to initially focusing on the major houses. Not to say you won't engage with the major houses, because it's kind of a Cold War circumstance where all of those guys are playing in the periphery, so you'll encounter them, but in this periphery environment, which allows a small player like you'll be in the beginning of the game to have influence, right? If you're playing in amongst the giant armies of the Inner Sphere, your small unit's not going to make that big of a difference. But out here on the frontier, even though you're encountering representatives of all the factions, you can actually, become a more important player. So it is both the classic setting and a new story take on it. Yep. But we've been very careful to do a lot of research about the canon to make sure that we're not stepping on or changing pre-existing canon.
Okay. And I should add, even in just this small slice of periphery that our game takes place in, we can still achieve a very grand scale to the storytelling and to the events that take place. One of the things we really want to drive home is scale in this game. Everywhere on combat, in a combat encounter, it's all about scale. It's all about making the mechs look giant and massive, and lots of damage is happening. But in the story too, the scale of the universe is just enormous, right? It's almost inconceivably large, the distance between stars. So our tiny slice, tiny is very relative. It's still this huge area of space, dozens and dozens of planets, and I think having it be not even involving the major houses just makes space seem that much larger.
Awesome. So
not even directly involving, I should say.
Right.
They'll be very present.
People are getting their first look, obviously, here at Gen Con. What is kind of the next step in the process for Battletech, where people will be seeing?
Well, what we've been focused on exclusively up to now, and will be for the next month or two, is the core combat engine, because the whole game has to be built on top of that foundation. So that's really all we're demonstrating here, is about a 70% complete core combat. So the next couple months we'll finish that down, lock that down, and then start to build all of the content for the campaign on one path and multiplayer on the other path. Because basically when we launch, both are supported. And for the campaign to be rich, we have to build lots of worlds, lots of missions, lots of combat encounters, and we can only do that on top of a stable foundation of the combat game itself.
Okay. As far as what's next for viewers, we do have a beta plan for backers that'll probably be early next year, although we don't have an exact ETA on it yet. And people can still get in on that beta at the $50 digital tier, which is now open again on our website.
Cool. And that website is?
Battletechgame.com.
Okay. Cool. Well, it seems like it's coming along great, and we can't wait. We're hoping to get to check it out for a quick minute. But
yeah,
thank you guys so much for telling us more about it, and we'll look forward to the beta early next year.
Awesome.
Thank you, and best of luck with the arm.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.